Welcome into this week's edition of AWA Unleashed. I am Chris Tubbs. I am one of three individuals that do this on a weekly basis, but every once in a while, we have a little extra, a little something fun. And I'm excited because my full-time job, I'm a producer. I'm on air. We're basically going to talk to somebody who knows a lot about the production side of the AWA. And I am super excited because it kind of goes into that geeky side of me. But that being said, before we get into that geeky side, let's bring in the other two geeks as we've got as well with Mick Karch and George Schire. And guys, I may have given away our guest when I added him to the stream, but I took him out. Hopefully people didn't see. But I'm excited to talk to him. But before we get to that, again, feedback continues to be just off the charts with some of the feedback that we're getting. We continue to grow, and I love it. Go ahead and start out, Georgie.
Well, the feedback has been tremendous. We continue to hear it. We love it. We're glad you're doing it. I look forward to Tuesdays. I listen to it on the way to work. I listen to it on the way home. And why don't you guys do this or talk about that? They're giving us lots of ideas. Mm-hmm. I only had one guy take exception to the fact that I said Billy Robinson wasn't champion because he made a better challenger. And, I love opinions. Everybody has them, and we know what else they also have. So it has been great. We're loving doing this. We absolutely are.
Yeah. What about you, Mick?
What I love is when I hear from somebody who says, hey, you know what? I grew up in those old AWA days, and I remember, and then they throw out a name that I never heard of. It'll be like, I remember Giuseppe Fenting Moth, and I think, what the hell? But because maybe he had a junior heavyweight championship or somewhere along the line, but the interaction with everybody via email and message is just great. We really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. I had one of my friends the other day, when you talk about not knowing a wrestler, he told me after he listened to the show that his dad knew Butch Levy and that Butch Levy was a plumber. And I told him, I said, well, it's not the same Butch Levy because Levy wrestled and then he went into the insurance and financial business for the remainder of his life. But he goes, oh, I guess I had him mixed up with somebody else. Well, I hope it wasn't the milkman.
Oh, my God. So keep it coming. If you guys have any questions at all, hit us up on any of the social medias. You can see right there. You can catch us on your favorite podcast platforms: Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, Google, Amazon, and YouTube. And we've got a trivia question, Mick, and then I've got a special edition that I'm really excited to bring aboard here. But what say you about our trivia this week, Mick?
Congratulations to St. Cloud's own Cody Merrill, who answered the trivia question correctly, wanted to know what two cities was Blackjack Lanza, who of course was a Minneapolis native, what two cities over the course of his AWA career was he billed out of? One was Laredo, Texas, and the other was Albuquerque, New Mexico. So, congrats to Cody Merrill.
And we're going to have another trivia question coming up later on in the hour, so be looking for that. Now, for those of you on YouTube, you are going to see in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you're going to see a logo for SodaStick. I am beyond excited that SodaStick is a sponsor here of AWA Unleashed. They are going to help bring this to you week in and week out. And I put the static logo right on there in the upper right-hand corner. I also put it on the bottom. If you're looking for Minnesota sports themed merchandise, whether it's T-shirts, whether it's hats, and Mick, I know that you've got the old Met Center one as well that was very popular with the wrestling here. Back in the day, also the North Stars. There it is. That is their hat. As a matter of fact, you go to SodaStick, go to SodaStickCO.com. Right there, use the promo code UNLEASHED for 15% off. So again, use 15% off, promo code UNLEASHED, SodaStickCO.com. And who knows, maybe we might even have some AWA Unleashed merchandise if that's something that people would be interested. You think people would want some AWA Unleashed swag?
In a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Think so? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we'll see. There we go. That's just something that we're going to be able to possibly introduce down the road. Now, without any further ado, we like to get. You don't like to do the same old things here, right, guys? I mean, so many different aspects of the AWA we want to cover. And one of them is the production side of it. Because everybody talks about the talent and the promoters and the wrestlers and the announcers, and that's great. But a lot of wrestling on TV, it wouldn't be possible without the production people involved. And let's go ahead and bring in a friend of both your guys's. It's Polish Joe Ciupik. And Joe, welcome to the program. I am ecstatic to have you on. So I appreciate you coming on here and making some time.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Friends?
Oh,
I
knew
know
it
the
was gonna
guys,
happen.
but I mean,
knew
you
it.
know.
Well, I got two Karches on the show.
Well, you could call me a friend. You can call them whatever the hell you want, but you can call me a
Chris,
friend.
Chris, I will consider you a friend. Karch and Schire, no. All
Well,
kidding aside.
if he wasn't mean to us, we wouldn't think he still loved us. So welcome, Joe. Glad to have you.
Exactly, George. You know me.
Only
Who's the guy in
boss.
the upper right corner? Mick Karch.
Mick Karch. What's your crotch?
I can smell the garlic still.
Oh.
Wait, what?
The garlic. Adnan would love to eat raw cloves of garlic, have garlic on his food, and when we did interview days, you knew when Adnan came into the studio. He very pungent.
His breath came into the studio 10 minutes before he did.
Easily, yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, wow. That was not where I was expecting to start.
Well, it only goes downhill from here, Chris. So
Yeah,
That's why you brought me on to go downhill.
good show, guys. Great job. All right. See you next week. So what was your background before getting into wrestling, Joe? I just want to jump right in. I mean, there's no way to make a transition out of garlic breath.
My background, I was a 20-year-old kid when I started with the AWA. I knew I wanted to get into broadcasting. I wanted to be a play-by-play commentator for either baseball or football. And it was by pure happenstance that I met Kathy Gagne. And the day that I graduated, a classmate at Brown Institute, where I went, Whipper Will Bryan, as Larry Nelson nicknamed him. Kathy had called Will to ask that he thought would also be interested, and Will immediately brought up my name, and Kathy was like, my God, I can't believe I didn't think of Joe, because when I found out who she was, being a lifelong wrestling fan, I started asking questions. I think the first question I asked her is, are you related to Vern? And the second question was, what was Crusher's real name? Because Crusher was my, he was my, I hate to use the term idol, but he was my favorite wrestler growing up, being Polish, Crusher having the whole Polish shtick, knew very little Polish for the record. He was my favorite. In fact, the very first main event that I ever saw was Crusher and Mad Dog in a steel cage match at the old St. Paul Auditorium. So I came in, Will and I both ran camera. The very first taste of production in professional wrestling was the morning after gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and Mr. Electricity, Steve Regal, with the help of their manageress Precious, and of course the help of the fabulous Freebirds, defeated the Road Warriors for the AWA Tag Team Championships, and we cut a series of interviews with them the next day. After we did probably 3 or 4 interviews for different markets, Mike Shields, who was brought in to produce the AWA, Mike was from Memphis wrestling, Mid-South area in Jarrett. He called us into the office and asked if we'd be interested in doing an internship. And I don't think I could have said yes faster. And did the whole month run. And here I am 37 years later talking about my time with the AWA. So I really didn't have a background. Again, 20-year-old kid, fresh out of broadcast school. But I knew that I wanted to get into video production, and I did.
Georgie, why don't you go ahead and kick it off here? I've got some more questions that I want to follow up with him here, but why don't you go ahead and jump on in here?
Well, I guess what I want to start with then, Joe, is you mentioned Mike Shields, and of course we're sad that he just recently left us. But you also had a chance to work with Al Darucha, who is a mutual friend of all of ours and one of the greatest guys. Tell us a little bit about learning or working with those guys and what you were able to soak up from them or to help hone your skills and talent.
So Al Darucha was the first producer of the AWA, first producer and director. He like many, did the exodus from the AWA and went to the WWF at the time. So I really learned more the basic training from Mike Shields. And it wasn't traditional video production. It was wrestling video production. And what that was is you got to cut for money because you're doing a weekly show with a skeleton crew, and you needed to churn out content. I mean, we were doing an hour of all-star wrestling syndicated internationally. We had ESPN Championship Wrestling, which was either a 60, a 90, or a 2-hour show. And then we added AWA Superstars, which is where I got my Polish Joe moniker from Larry Nelson through that. So we're doing up to 4 hours of programming every week for the AWA. So it was a cut for money. What I learned from Al was more about the business than production. Al, with his background, very simplified video production. 2 cameras was a luxury when Al was directing. Even the AWA was a 2-camera shoot in the studio. At best, it seemed many times it only felt like 1, but had to be 2 because we had the interview area as you were looking at it. There's the ring, and the interview area was off to the right. So it was simplified version. So Al is one of my closest, dearest friends. I talk to him probably every month or 6 weeks or so just to check in, especially now with Al getting older. But from Mike Shields, I learned how to cut for money and how to do everything video production wise simply. That's where I learned, although the blaster coming through the wall could have been gimmicked a little bit better. But you learn you just got to make stuff cheap so they can easily destroy stuff. And we could move stuff to set up the set ideally.
I've always been surprised with that blaster situation. A lot of fans remember it, and of course I do too. And yet when you think back in time, it went nowhere. That was the moment right there, but from there on it was over.
The blaster did a match in Vegas. at the Showboat where we did our tapings, and it wasn't quite a memorable night of wrestling for him. I'm trying to, be kind, because I know how difficult it is to get over in the ring. He just wasn't able to do it.
Joe, I want to throw in a quick comment about Al Darucha, first of all, and then I got a question about another couple of gentlemen. Al Darucha, to this day, I blame Al, because he is the man that planted the word gimmick in my vocabulary back in 1987. You and I and Al were having lunch prior to a taping, and Al asked the waitress to bring him the Parmesan cheese gimmick. From that point on, everything in life became a gimmick. So, Al Darucha, I blame you. Now, on to another.
Well, real quick,
Yeah.
I still catch myself doing it to my wife, and when I do it, I can hear her eyes roll when I call something a gimmick.
Well, as long as you don't call your wife a gimmick, you're okay.
Good point.
Okay.
Good point.
Joe, I want to ask you about a couple of guys that were there before I was there. We worked with them together. And one is Rod Trongard, one is Larry Nelson. And two divergent personalities completely in the way they approached life. But I just loved working with those two.
Rod Trongard was a phenomenal talent to call professional wrestling. My only critique of Rod is that he found it difficult to transform from radio broadcasting to television, where radio you need to constantly talk because there is no visual. You can't have dead air. And Rod oftentimes, and look, the situation with Lord James Blair's, Rod, as good as Rod was, he needed to not talk as much. When he did, he was phenomenal. And it's not, I'm not saying it was a horrible, bad thing, but if there was the one critique I would give to Rod, it was that. Otherwise, Rod was a consummate pro, had his own catchphrases. I see Uncle Larry there, and I will get to him very short. That doesn't look like him. I need the AWA beard that he had at the time.
Yeah.
But Rod was great, and you could always count on him coming in to the Showboat and being well tanned, because he loved to ski. And yes, you can get tan from skiing. As far as Larry Nelson goes, oh my God, what can how many hours do we have on this pod? He absolutely amazed me when we had to do a countdown. Quite frankly, he amazed me across the entire board. We would give him the bullet points of what he needed to discuss, whether it was in an interview or a talking head intro or outro or close or close of a show. Larry would not only hit everything perfectly, but I'd start giving him a countdown. I'd be at 10 seconds and I'm like, how in the hell is he going to be able to fit everything that he still needs to fit in? And he did every single time. And if he finished early, there was not a time that Larry didn't take it right up to the 3, 2. And and we'll see you next time on All Star Wrestling. Every single time he would hit that mark.
And that is so hard to do when you've got to hit your mark to the second.
Exactly. But Larry could do it. He had the radio background, but he also knew how to change that for television. Larry's only downside on being on TV was as an interviewer. Larry was too tall. Larry was a good, I'm 6'3". Larry was about my height. I think I was a little bit taller than him. But oftentimes, doing interviews, Larry would stand with his legs spread apart so that he could shrink down a little bit. You know, when you got the rockers out there who are maybe 6 foot, you don't want the interviewer to be taller than your talent. Even though they're standing in front of them, Larry would still be taller than them. But Larry, consummate pro, both of them consummate pros. So many stories, so much fun with Larry. And again, he gave me my Polish Joe moniker, and we had all kinds of fun. That was on the Superstars of the AWA.
I have a Larry Nelson incident. I saw him walking one time at the Cauliflower Alley Club, and he was wearing thongs.
On his feet or on his derriere?
Well, that's where I'm going with this. I told him that they're not called thongs anymore, because that's what he called them to me. And I said, they're not called thongs, they're flip-flops. And the problem is that he was still calling them thongs. And so it just tells you where we've come in our society. That
last time I heard from Larry out of the absolute blue, last time I talked to him was the week before he sadly and mysteriously disappeared from the AWA. And so it would have been probably a dozen or so years. And how he found my phone number at the time, I'll never know. But I got a call. It was later at night, about 9, 10 o'clock at night. And I could tell Larry had a couple of cocktails in him. He enjoyed his cocktail.
Well, he was a party guy.
Oh,
he was a party guy.
In many ways.
Yeah.
But he calls me up and he goes, Polish Joe, it's Larry Nelson, Larry Shipley. And I'm like, how the hell are you doing, Larry? What are you up to? Oh, I'm doing great. I just want to let you know I wrote a book and you're in the book. I hope everything is great. Loved working with you. I hope you enjoy the book. I'm going to send you a copy. And he hung up. And I'm like, okay, I think he might have finished his drink and needed a refresher. Well, lo and behold, a few days later, I got the book, and he had very kind words about me, and it was fun. It was fun reliving a time in my life that I will not soon forget.
All right, I gotta go. Go ahead, Mick. Go ahead.
Yeah, Joe, talk a little bit about the two guys that were doing the booking when you and I were there, Wahoo McDaniel and Ray Stevens. You had two absolute legends in professional wrestling. And my question to you would be, when you have two guys with that kind of talent and that kind of history behind them, how do you think that translated into their booking philosophies? And do you think that they also might have been a little bit behind what was behind the times in terms of the direction wrestling was going?
I think the challenge that they had was the unfortunate turnover at the AWA. As we all know, to build up an angle properly, you need time. And the AWA, while still maintaining somewhat of a cohesive talent pool, still had a lot of the talent would still leave. And so you would get something booked and you're a couple of months into it, and then the talent leaves. And that happened all too often. And that became the big challenge. As far as them being behind the time for booking for wrestling at the time, I don't think so, because the AWA was still in the 70s mode and early 80s mode. I'll call it, before Vince. They did what they could with what they had at the time, and that includes Vern, Nick, and Greg, who are also involved in the booking. You lay out an angle and try to make it run for 3-4 months. Well, you couldn't always count on it, and that became a big challenge for Ray and Wall. Maybe that's what drove him to drink. Yeah.
Well, that was something that didn't happen back in the 70s, where you'd had to worry about a wrestler or wrestlers bolting or not being involved. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you did book and send out tapes 4 or 5 weeks ahead, it's tough when the program is changing before the program is even played out.
Yep. And it became, when we were sending out our shows, Minneapolis, the Minneapolis market was always a week ahead. Mm-hmm. We'd finish up a show. There were literally oftentimes I would drop off the Sunday morning show for KMSP that aired at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Actually, the times, it was both over the later years, but there were times where it was Sunday morning at 8 a.m. and I would drop off Sunday morning show, especially if there was a show the night before and Vern wanted to get an interview in or a replay in. But all of the other markets, we would do the dubs for, get them shipped out on a Thursday, and then they would run the weekend after. So we were fortunate here in Minneapolis, and oftentimes Minneapolis was the only market that would see an angle that happened at the Civic Center.
So let me ask you this, Joe. When you were on the floor and you were kind of working, did you know where you had to be ahead of time when you had to shoot something?
Funny, because I just had this conversation with another person yesterday. Vern K Faved me until 2001, during the time when the AWA was revived through a series of pay-per-views. There was an angle that we did in Vegas with Snuka and De Beers. And if it wasn't for Mike Shields, we would not have known where we needed to be to get De Beers coming out and pushing Jimmy off of the top rope and landing on the concrete floor. Vern would not tell, he would tell Mike, but he wouldn't tell the cameraman at the time. And big mistake on Vern's part. If we missed something, he'd get pissed. It's like, well, how the hell do we know that?
You guys have to know. You guys have to know ahead of time. Yeah, you guys have to know ahead of time where you have to be, so you know what the shot is.
And it's part. There was a part of Vern's old school approach, where if you watch the old All-Star Wrestling shows, it was a one camera and it was wide. The majority of the footage was just a wide shot. Very rarely did you see a close-up. It would be for introductions, but it was never for the action, because Vern wanted to make sure that everything going off of the ropes, everything was captured on that one main camera angle. And Vern would always complain when we're in Vegas, we come back from Vegas and he'd watch a show, he'd come in and complain and call it tight-itis. You guys have got too much tight-itis. I want to be able to see if somebody's in a headlock on the mat, we zoom in and show the reaction on their face. Vern hated that. He wanted to see the headlock and he wanted to see the entire body that was being administered pain, as well as the body that was administering the pain. And it was tough. It was tough. That's not where wrestling was at in the 1980s, with multiple cameras and doing close-ups.
Yeah. Was there an angle that was your most memorable, or ones that you really enjoyed shooting that you can remember off the top of your head?
Well, I already brought up the De Beers Snuka one, mainly because that was, Jimmy Snuka came into the AWA. A true legend in the sport, and during a time where I still felt there was hope that the AWA was going to be able to compete with the WWF. The other part that makes that more memorable, well, actually, to go on the whole K Faved thing, after that incident, we're in a hotel room afterwards having a couple of adult beverages, and Jimmy pulls me aside and talks to me about how Vern needs to smarten up the camera guys. Mm-hmm. And how he is shooting himself in the foot by kayfabing too many people in the business at the time. So that's why that one was memorable to me, not only because Snuka came in, but Jimmy sat me down in that hotel room and we had a good 10-15 minute conversation about how to smarten up the crew and how to shoot angles. And that was in between drinks and Jimmy lighting up a joint, I'm sure. Jimmy enjoyed that. But the other part, as it extends out, is that the whole approach of that angle then transformed into Derek Dukes. And the whole racial angle, which I didn't care for at the time, the whole, if I win, if Dukes wins, he pays De Beers black. If De Beers wins, he paints Dukes white. I didn't care for that, but that all started, the whole Dukes De Beers angle started with Snuka. The other angle, I mean, I could easily say Kurt and Nick, just because they were two of the best that I've ever seen work a match. But if the other one that I would bring up has to be the Rose Summers Rockers angle. That one, I literally have goosebumps just thinking of the match at the Showboat that put that angle on the map.
Yeah, and there it is, right? I just put it up there for you, Joe, to kind of jog the memory there.
That match, the excitement and the fervor in that audience that night, I've never experienced a crowd pop like that for a match. And that doesn't even touch on the incredible match that those guys did. Whenever I've talked to a locker room of new talent, I'll always tell them, you've got one job tonight, and that's to make me believe. And if you're able to make me believe, then I know that the fans in the audience and the person watching at home, that they're going to believe. And that Rose Summers Rockers bloodbath, that wasn't the start of the angle, but that elevated it to main event status. That match, they made me believe.
All right, and go ahead and jump in here, Mick.
Got another question for you, bud, and this will get the skin rankled and your blood boiling. Take us back to Whitewater, Wisconsin. In 1987, you and I have talked about this. This was the night that Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee lost the AWA Tag Team Championship to Paul E. and the original Midnight Express. And you have been quoted as saying this was the single worst television taping you were ever a part of. Please explain.
The single worst video production I've ever been a part of, from shooting a home movie to doing something for ESPN.
Wow. Okay.
That show started horribly because it was on the downslide of the AWA, and instead of going to Showboat and having the expense of flying all of the talent in, Vern decided to go to some small towns, Whitewater being one of them. The production crew that we hired, the crew was okay, but the equipment and everything was cable access 101. And it showed in the production. The camera control units were not working. Communications were failing between the director and those that had headsets on. The lighting was atrocious. There was literally nothing good. Actually, there was only one good thing that happened that night. That was the end of it. It was horrible. I remember coming back to the studio, and I edited the weekly shows together. And I called Mike in, and I said, what the hell do we do with this? He goes, well, we really don't have a choice. We got to air this. And I'm like, can I take my name off of the credits at the end of the show? It was just horrible. Nothing good about that, including the drive there, I think.
Did you know it was going to be bad? Like the minute that you got there and all the equipment, everything, you knew like it was going to be an uphill battle?
No, they got everything set up, and it certainly wasn't the equipment setup wasn't as accustomed to what I was used to in Vegas. We had a full production trailer, all professional equipment, everything. Never had any major issues in Vegas. What we did in Whitewater in the business, it was done as like a fly pack approach. And the fly pack became a bunch of gnats rather than a fly.
Joe, come on. You have to admit that Vern splurged for at least 25-watt light bulbs for the lighting. He gave up 2 rats, sad to say, collapsed on the treadmill as they were powering up the entire production. Give the man some credit.
That was the lighting that we had for Whitewater, Wisconsin. At least that's what it felt like. The lights were, we didn't have a lighting grid above. They were on stanchions. I mean, it put the AWA back 40 years, and that's when the AWA didn't exist. The productions that were done in the 60s looked better than Whitewater, Wisconsin.
Sorry I brought it up. Let's move on.
All right. What do you got here, George?
Well, other than that debacle,